Imagine, imagine for a second that you're going to the doctor for this really mysterious, complicated illness.
Right.
You sit down in the exam room, and instead of looking at your whole medical chart or, reviewing your blood work or even just looking you in the eye, the doctor just pulls out a magnifying glass.
Oh, no.
Yeah, and they just stare intently at a single freckle on your left arm for like 10 minutes. And then they look up and say, okay, I have your diagnosis.
I mean, you would run out of that clinic immediately, right?
As fast as I could.
It sounds completely absurd when you frame it as a human interaction, but terrifyingly, that is remarkably close to how our absolute top-tier medical AI has been operating for years.
Really? Just looking at the freckle?
Essentially, yes.
Yeah.
When it looks at tissue samples to diagnose disease, it isolates this tiny, tiny fragment of data and just tries to guess the whole story from that.
Which is wild to think about, considering how much we, rely on technology for medical breakthroughs now.
Oh, absolutely.
But today, we are doing a deep dive into a completely different approach that finally fixes this massive blind spot.
It's a game changer.
It really is. We're looking at a groundbreaking new research paper that introduces a computational pathology model, and it's called MOOZY. MOOZY. And MOOZY is essentially teaching computers to step back and look at the whole patient.
And it is a profound shift in perspective.
Yeah.
I mean, you're currently living in this tech ecosystem that is utterly obsessed with scale.
Right, the bigger the better.
Exactly. We hear constantly about these massive AI models backed by billions of dollars, gobbling up all this private data, and just brute forcing their way through problems using sheer size. But MOOZY is doing something highly unusual here.
Yeah, the paper really highlights that.
It achieves state-of-the-art benchmark-beating results using entirely open public data. And it manages to do this simply by changing its fundamental base unit of understanding. So going from the glass laboratory slide to the patient as a whole.
Okay, to really grasp why MOOZY is necessary, I think we need to understand the roadblock that basically every medical AI has been crashing into.
The big wall.
Yeah, the paper calls it the gigapixel problem. Because when a human pathologist looks at tissue to diagnose something like cancer, they use what are called whole slide images. And these are, well, they are not like the photos you take on your smartphone.
Far from it. If a standard photo on your phone is around, say, 12 megapixels, a single whole slide image from a pathology lab can easily be a gigapixel.
A gigapixel?
Yes, that is 1 billion pixels.
That is just an incomprehensible amount of data for one image.
It is. And if you try to feed an image that massive directly into a standard neural network all at once, the computer's memory will just instantly max out.
It just crashes.
Right, the system crashes. It's the computational equivalent of trying to shove water from a fire hose through a tiny coffee straw.
So, engineers obviously needed a workaround. If the computer can't swallow the whole gigapixel image at once, how does it process it? The paper mentions the standard method is something called multiple instance learning, or MIL.
Yes, MIL.
Can you break down how that actually works in practice for us?
Absolutely. So because the AI can't look at the entire gigapixel image, the MIL approach takes that massive image and chops it up into thousands of microscopic tiles.
Like puzzle pieces.
Exactly like puzzle pieces.
Okay.
It's like taking a giant map of the world and cutting it into tiny 1-inch squares. The AI then looks at each little square completely independently.
Just one by one.
Yep. And after it analyzes all those isolated patches, it uses a process called naive early or late fusion.
Naive fusion. That sounds incredibly technical. What does that actually mean?
It's basically a highly technical term for a very simple and frankly flawed process. It just averages all the predictions together at the end.
Wait, really just an average?
Yeah. The AI throws all those little square tiles into a virtual bag, shakes it up, and treats the patient's medical case as an unordered pool.
So it's totally losing the geographical layout of the tissue.
Completely losing it. And if we think about what is biologically being lost there, it's staggering.
Because context matters.
Right. In diseases like cancer, the diagnostic meaning doesn't just live inside one single mutated cell. The true meaning emerges from long-range interactions.
Can you give an example of that?
Sure. So pathologists look for tumor heterogeneity.
Heterogeneity meaning?
Meaning how a tumor biologically changes as it spreads across different areas of the tissue.
Yeah.
Or they look for multifocal staging, where there might be distinct separate tumor sites across multiple different slides from the same patient.
Okay, I see.
By chopping the slide up and treating it as a shuffle deck of cards, you are discarding all those vital cross-slide interactions.
Okay, let's unpack this. It sounds a bit like trying to understand a complex 2-hour mystery movie, right? But you take every single frame of the film, shuffle them up, look at them totally out of order, and then try to guess who the killer is just by averaging out the colors you saw.
That is a perfect analogy.
You completely lose the plot. But I'm stuck on something here. Why did the smartest engineers in the world settle for this shuffled movie method Is it strictly just because of the computer hardware limits we talked about?
Well, this raises an important question, and the answer actually reveals a massive flaw in how we've been teaching medical AI in the first place.
Oh.
Yeah, the field of computational pathology hit a performance ceiling because it basically borrowed its strategies directly from general vision AI.
You mean like the kind of AI that powers self-driving cars or facial recognition?
Exactly those.
The ones that learn by looking at billions of pictures of dogs and street signs and landscapes on the internet.
Right. But natural images on the internet have an infinite variety of shapes, colors, and lighting. But histopathology tissue, those pink and purple stained glass slides you see under a microscope, they have a very narrow visual space.
Meaning they all kind of look similar to an untrained eye?
Yes. The paper says it has a strictly bounded set of morphological primitives.
Morphological primitives.
Which just means there are only so many shapes a cell or a gland can biologically take. So the AI learns those tiny tile-level shapes very quickly, and then it plateaus. It just stops improving.
Because it's maxed out on what it can learn from a tiny square.
Precisely. The true bottleneck for diagnosing a patient isn't identifying the tiny details. The bottleneck is the long-range context. It's understanding how a specific glandular pattern on the left side of a slide relates to the immune response happening way over on the right side.
Okay, so if the current AI is missing the big picture because it's looking at shuffled movie frames, how do we force it to sit down and watch the whole film in context?
That is exactly what MOOZY sets out to do.
Right, which brings us to the actual architecture of MOOZY. It's built in two distinct stages, isn't it?
It is.
And stage one is all about building a foundation without human doctors needing to hold the AI's hand.
Yes, stage one is what the researchers call vision-only self-supervised pre-training.
So no human labels?
Zero.
No.
They gathered 77,134 public slide feature grids, and these are massive data sets spanning 23 different anatomical sites.
Wow.
We're talking brain tissue, lung tissue, breast tissue, all at 20x and 40x magnification. And they just let the AI model learn the visual language of human biology entirely on its own. No clinical reports, no doctor ever tells the AI, this is cancer or this is healthy tissue.
Now, I have to push back here for a second because that sounds incredibly risky.
It does sound counterintuitive.
Yeah, if you are just letting an AI stare at unlabeled medical images, how do we know it isn't, hallucinating biological rules? If it doesn't even know what cancer is, how is it learning anything clinically useful?
It's a very valid concern. And it's exactly why the specific method of self-supervised learning they use is so important. They use a technique called block masking.
Block masking? How does that work?
Imagine taking one of those massive tissue images and throwing giant digital black boxes over large contiguous chunks of it.
Right.
You are completely hiding significant portions of the tissue from the AI. The system is then forced to predict what the missing tissue looks like, based purely on the unmasked structures surrounding it.
Wait, so it's playing a giant high-stakes game of guess the missing pixels.
Essentially, yes.
Yeah.
But because the researchers use solid blocks, not just blurring the image or removing random speckles of pixels, the AI is denied the ability to just memorize isolated cell shapes.
It has to actually understand the structure.
Exactly. To accurately guess what's missing in a complex biological structure, the AI has to implicitly learn the deep rules of tissue architecture. It has to figure out that if there's a specific type of stroma, which is the supportive connective tissue on the left, and a specific ductal formation on the right,
then the hidden space in the middle must contain a certain biological bridge.
You've got it.
Ah, I see. So it's basically learning the fundamental geography and anatomy of human tissue. It's like teaching someone the fundamental laws of physics and gravity before you ever ask them to build a bridge.
That's a great way to put it.
It just deeply understands how the materials work together.
Precisely. It is building what the researchers call a general-purpose spatial prior. It is learning the underlying structural language of the body before it ever has to read a specific clinical story.
Okay, so stage one teaches it the physical laws of tissue. But knowing what a healthy or sick cell looks like geometrically doesn't tell a doctor how to treat a patient or how long that patient might live.
No, it doesn't.
How does MOOZY cross that bridge from general biology to actual clinical prognosis?
That transition is what happens in stage two. They call this patient-aware semantic alignment.
Semantic alignment.
Right. This is where we steer all that incredible general-purpose spatial knowledge toward actual clinical utility. The researchers designed a massive multitask supervision regime.
And the numbers in the paper here are crazy. We are talking about 333 distinct clinical tasks derived from 56 different public data sets.
It's a huge curriculum for the AI.
333 tasks is massive. And from reading the paper, these aren't just simple, is this tumor malignant or benign questions? They included 205 classification tasks, sure, but also 128 survival tasks.
Yes, the survival tasks are key.
Can you explain what a survival task actually is in this context?
It's a predictive metric used heavily in oncology. Things like overall survival, which predicts how long a patient will live after diagnosis, or disease-free interval, which predicts how long a patient will remain cancer-free after their initial treatment before potential relapse.
Wow.
Yeah, the AI is being asked to look at the physical tissue architecture and accurately forecast the longitudinal, multi-year trajectory of a human being's life.
That is heavy. And to accomplish something that complex, the paper introduces the defining innovation of 𝗲𝗄𝘆, the absolute core of the model.
The case transformer.
Yes,
Yeah.
case transformer. We talked earlier about how the old AI models compress those tiny slides into digital summaries and then just throw them into an unordered virtual bag. How does the case transformer handle those digital summaries differently?
Well, instead of an unordered bag, 𝗲𝗄𝘆 prepends a learnable master key called the case token.
The case token.
Right. It attaches this token to the sequence of those slide summaries, which are technically called embeddings. This case transformer explicitly models the mathematical dependencies across all the slides belonging to that single patient.
Across the slide.
Yes. It is forcing the model to look at slide 1, look at slide 2, look at slide 3, and calculate exactly how they relate to each other to form a unified, holistic representation of that person.
Here's where it gets really interesting. It's compressing the slides into digital summaries, but keeping them structurally linked. It feels a bit like a lead detective putting clues on a corkboard.
That's a brilliant way to visualize it. But remember, the older models just took those clues, a footprint here, a receipt there, threw them into a cardboard box, shook it up, and tried to guess the crime.
Right, whereas MOOZY is the detective standing at the board, using that case token to physically string red yarn between the footprint and the receipt.
Yes.
It's explicitly tracing the relationship between the pieces of evidence across different slides to see the whole narrative.
Exactly. The red yarn is the explicit dependency modeling. And stepping back to look at AI development broadly, this two-stage process is a massive leap forward.
Because it splits up the work.
Because knowledge is most valuable when it is contextualized. By decoupling the biological learning in stage 1 from the disease-specific training in stage 2, MOOZY avoids a trap that ruins older models.
Which is what?
Well, older models try to learn what human tissue looks like and how to diagnose a specific rare cancer at the exact same time, from scratch, using only a tiny amount of labeled data.
Oh, which is like trying to learn the English alphabet and trying to write a Shakespearean sonnet at the exact same time.
Exactly. It's overwhelming for this system.
Because MOOZY already mastered the alphabet in stage 1, it can use the clinical data in stage 2 purely to refine its medical reasoning.
You hit the nail on the head.
Okay, so the theory sounds incredibly elegant. A patient-first detective that teaches itself biology. But the AI landscape is utterly ruthless right now.
Oh, it's intensely competitive.
Does this open data two-stage model actually compete with the Goliath models out there? The ones funded by massive tech budgets. Because this paper doesn't pull any punches when comparing MOOZY to the industry giants.
It doesn't, and the test results are frankly staggering. Let's look at the sheer scale first, because it contextualizes the achievement.
Okay.
We measure AI models in parameters, which are essentially the internal variables or neural connections the model uses to make decisions. One of the leading competing models in this space, called GigaPath, has 1.22 billion parameters.
Billion with a B. An absolute behemoth of a system.
Right. Massive. MOOZY, by contrast, operates on only 85.77 million parameters.
That's tiny in comparison.
It is roughly 14 times smaller than GigaPath. It is highly parameter efficient.
Which feels like a massive David versus Goliath situation. But why should that matter to you, the listener? If a tech company wants to build a billion parameter model, isn't bigger just inherently better? What is the real-world benefit of MOOZY being 14 times smaller?
It's all about the democratization of healthcare technology.
Democratization, okay.
A 1.2 billion parameter model requires massive, highly expensive supercomputers and server farms to run. Most local or community hospitals simply cannot afford that kind of computational infrastructure.
Right, they just don't have the budget.
By making MOOZY 14 times smaller, you are creating a system that could theoretically run on standard, high-end desktop hardware. It means the rural community hospital could have access to the exact same diagnostic power as the elite, well-funded research institution.
That makes perfect sense. The accessibility is built right into the architecture. But what happens when they actually step into the ring? A smaller model is great, but only if it's accurate.
Right.
The researchers tested MOOZY on 8 held-out clinical tasks, meaning they tested the AI on patient data it had never seen before to prove it wasn't just, memorizing its training data.
And this is where MOOZY truly shines. Despite being drastically smaller, it achieved the best or tied best performance on most metrics across those 8 tasks.
Really?
Yeah. It improved weighted F1 scores over a model called Titan by 7.37% and over PRISM by 8.83%.
Wow.
For instance, one of the tasks was predicting residual cancer burden.
Let's pause there. What exactly is residual cancer burden and why is predicting it so important?
Residual cancer burden is a metric used to measure exactly how much cancer is left in the body after a patient undergoes preliminary treatment, like chemotherapy, before surgery. Accurately predicting this from a slide helps oncologists know if the treatment is actually working, or if they need to aggressively pivot to a different therapy. MOOZY dominated in predicting this.
That's incredible.
It also excelled at identifying specific genetic mutations, like TP53 or KRAS, directly from the tissue architecture.
And just to clarify, TP53 and KRAS are specific gene mutations that drive cancer growth, right?
Exactly.
Finding them usually requires really expensive genetic sequencing, but MOOZY is predicting their presence just by looking at the visual layout of the cells.
Yes. Knowing if a patient has a KRAS mutation dictates entirely what kind of targeted therapy they should receive. The fact that MOOZY can predict these genetic realities simply from the visual spatial patterns on a slide, outperforming models 14 times its size, it just proves how deeply it understands biology.
And the paper includes some incredible visual proof of this, too. They use a mapping technique called UMAP. For anyone who isn't a data scientist, can you explain what a UMAP visualization actually does?
Sure. AI models think in hundreds or thousands of dimensions simultaneously, which human brains obviously can't comprehend.
Right.
UMP is a mathematical technique that takes all that hyper-complex, multidimensional data and squashes it down flat onto a 2D map. It allows our human eyes to see how the AI is grouping and categorizing different concepts.
Right, and when you look at the UMP visualizations in the paper for how the massive billion-parameter models separate different cancer types, the map looks kind of muddy.
Very muddy.
The dots representing different diseases kind of bleed into each other, but MOOZY's map has these beautiful, distinct, clear islands. It is organizing breast cancer completely separate from lung cancer with incredible visual clarity.
That visual clarity on the UMP translates directly to clinical reliability in the hospital. And to really verify why this smaller model was outperforming the massive ones, the researchers brought in a board-certified human pathologist to review the AI's attention maps.
Ah, yes. Explain what an attention map is, because this was the part of the study that really pulled it all together for me.
An attention map is essentially a diagnostic heat map. It shows human doctors exactly which microscopic pixels on the slide the AI is staring at when it makes its medical decision.
Okay.
The human pathologist reviewed these heat maps and gave the models two specific scores. A shift score, which measures if the AI is looking widely across the whole slide or just hyper-focusing on the tumor, and a semantic gap score.
And the semantic gap score measures if the AI is actually missing diagnostically relevant tissue.
Precisely. If the score is high, the AI is ignoring tissue that a human doctor would consider critical. MOOZY achieved the absolute lowest semantic gap score, a perfect 1.00.
The perfect score.
Meaning it virtually never missed important relevant tissue.
Right.
And it had a highly balanced shift score of 2.63, meaning its attention was perfectly distributed.
So here's the million-dollar question. If MOOZY has a perfect semantic gap score, what is this 85 million parameter model actually looking at that the 1.2 billion parameter models are completely blind to?
If we connect this to the bigger picture, it all comes back to mimicking how human experts operate. The older, massive models suffer from a condition we can call hotspot hyperfixation.
Hotspot hyperfixation.
They scan the slide, they find the most glaringly obvious patch of malignant tumor cells, and they just stare at it. They ignore the surrounding environment entirely.
Wow, it is quite literally that doctor from our earlier scenario, staring at the single freckle and ignoring the rest of the patient.
Exactly. They just zoom in on the obvious threat and tune everything else out.
That's so limiting.
It is. But MOOZY, because the way it was trained in stage 1 by guessing those missing blocks of tissue, and because the case transformer strings that red yarn between the slides in stage 2, has learned that the surrounding context is just as important as the focal point.
Because it knows how the tissue connects.
Right. MOOZY actively analyzes both the malignant tumor and the non-malignant tissue surrounding it. It looks at the supportive stroma, it analyzes the immune cells rushing toward the tumor, it checks the healthy cells bordering the disease.
It's looking at the battlefield, not just the enemy.
That is a brilliant way to put it. It actively mirrors how a real, human expert pathologist evaluates a slide. A human doctor doesn't just look at the cancer. They look at how the patient's body is reacting to the cancer in the neighborhood around it.
Right.
MOOZY proves that architecture and context matter far more than sheer computational size. When you concentrate your processing power at the holistic patient level, rather than obsessing over the microscopic tile level, you unlock a much deeper, more accurate understanding.
So what does this all mean for you, the listener? We've gone deep today into gigapixel images, self-supervised learning, and the mechanics of case transformers.
We covered a lot of ground.
We did. But the core aha moment here is really about the future of technology and how we approach complex problem solving. The future of medical AI, and perhaps AI in general, doesn't have to rely on black box proprietary models that just brute force their way through problems using billions of parameters and massive supercomputers.
Exactly. Bigger isn't always smarter.
Right. MOOZY proves that by simply changing your perspective from analyzing an isolated data point like a single slide to understanding the entire ecosystem, the whole patient technology can be highly accessible, it can be mathematically smaller, and it can be infinitely more useful to human life.
It truly is a profound lesson in systems thinking. MOOZY succeeds, ultimately, because it pays attention to the surrounding context, the spaces between the cancer cells, the relationships connecting the evidence.
Yeah.
And I think that leaves us with a fascinating, broader question to consider in our own lives. When you are faced with a highly complex problem, whether it's an issue at work, a conflict in a relationship, or a hurdle in a creative project, are you hyperfixating on the isolated hotspot? Or are you stepping back to look at the entire ecosystem surrounding it?
Wow. A patient-first AI teaching us a little something about how to step back and see the big picture. That is all for this deep dive into MOOZY and computational pathology. Thanks for listening.